For destination organizations around the world, 2021 marks the year recovery starts. But success in the post-COVID era will likely require a new business model for many of us. For those of us whose past success was dependent on maximizing the number of people in a contained space, welcome to your new day. For those whose business has been propped up by government subsidies or lack of competition, the clock is ticking. Destination marketers are quickly recognizing the importance of engaging their local audience and rethinking every traditional marketing strategy, albeit with depleted budgets. To paraphrase Darwin, adapt or die. I wish I could take credit for that prescient and well-crafted passage, but the truth is it was written back in September by one of my favorite CEOs in the industry. He's a graduate of the University of Illinois with a degree in accounting and finance. He worked at GE under Jack Welch in the corporation's halcyon days, and for 19 years, he ran the wildly successful Myrtle Beach area Chamber of Commerce. And just when you think he might be winding it down, he picked up his roots and moves 2,000 kilometers south to lead Puerto Rico's first ever destination marketing organization as they emerged from the crippling after effects of Hurricane Maria in 2017. To say Brad Dean is not afraid of a challenge is an understatement for sure. Good morning, Brad Dean. How are you? Where are you? What's it like?
Hey, good morning. Great to be with you, David. I am in the 500-year-old city of Old San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico. That's where our offices are located at Discover Puerto Rico. I'm overlooking the cobblestone streets and the cruise port, which unfortunately both are empty today, but we know better days lie ahead. So 80-degree weather here in San Juan, and we're excited to be with you today. Thanks for the opportunity.
What's it like on the ground there today? Where are you at in your pursuit of your tourism strategy?
So Puerto Rico put in restrictions early on. I think we were one of the first destinations in the U.S. to begin the slowdown or close down, depending on how you view it. And that was in large part because Puerto Rico had dealt with the Zika virus a couple of years before this. So we were well prepared, at least in terms of what we knew to do to address this early on. Of course, none of us expected a pandemic like we've seen. So slowly through 2020, we began to build back up. And then when the COVID numbers began to rise late in the year, we went back into slow down mode. So, like so many destination promoters, it's not in our DNA to say, don't come, but we found ourselves discouraging people from traveling. Today in January, we're beginning to see the recovery. Our numbers are beginning to improve. The beaches have reopened. Hotels throughout the island are now opening. Of course, we still are asking visitors to either have a COVID test before they travel here or quarantine when they arrive. But thankfully, once you come, businesses are open. The scenery is beautiful as ever, and we're hopeful that we're at the cusp of what's going to be the great recovery of travel and tourism.
Well, and let's talk about that for a second, because you arrive in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. You've literally, I'm in some sense guessing, become used to being in a recovery strategy. You've been doing it since 2018, and you pile on Zika and you pile on COVID, but I imagine the organization is getting very good at realizing that they're in a major transition and really have been for the last 3 years.
Yeah, you perfectly summed it up. We had been through several years of crises. I jokingly say this, but when I ask stakeholders, it's like, when were the good old days? And people have forgotten we've been through so many things. But, when you consider what the island went through, I mean, Hurricanes Irma and Maria devastated the island. But, here's the good news. Through the worst natural disaster in the history of the U.S., we were actually driving record numbers just 2 years later. So recovery can happen quickly. And that's important, not just for Puerto Rico. That's important for all of us to know. Of course, 2020 for us began with 3 straight weeks of earthquakes. So our year didn't start off well. And once we were kind of getting out from under that, then COVID hit. So we are so eager to get back to seeing a vibrant, robust tourism economy. And of course, for Puerto Rico, it's critically important for the island. So every day when I wake up, I've got 86,000 reasons to give it my all, because there's 86,000 people whose livelihoods depend on our visitor economy, and they're counting on us to get this recovery moving sooner rather than later.
So I want to go to the piece that you wrote back in September. It was called The Long and Winding Road. I'll let you explain that. But when I read it and I look at essentially the paragraph headers, it is a great framework for guiding principles in recovery. I don't care if it's hurricanes, Zikas, earthquakes, or COVID. So here's the paragraph headers. Travel will recover. We are all responsible. Shifting business models. Establishing trust. Managing impact. Being efficient and innovating. And lead, follow, get out of the way. So tell us a little bit about that article, Along the Winding Road, and what compelled you to write it, and what's the key message?
Yeah, a couple of things came from that. Number one is I was trying to create for our team and our stakeholders here a vision of what the future looked like. It's so critical as leaders. We have to be able to cast a vision and then, of course, develop the plans and strategies and execute those to deliver on that vision. What I found in 2020, which is unlike anything I've experienced in my career, is as a leader, I had to be vulnerable and just admit, I don't know what we're in for. I really don't know. When I wrote that, I was thinking, I never thought I'd even be talking about COVID at that point. I thought it would be behind us. So as I thought about the recovery and what most of us think of as a recovery process, this is a long and winding road, much like the Beatles sang in their famous song. It is not a straight path. It's not a V-shaped recovery, as the economists tell us. This is a long and winding road. It's got ups and it's got downs, it's got twists and it's got turns. But we know that in the end, there's brighter days that lie ahead for all of us. And I think all of us can relate to this. In every one of our communities, businesses have been hit hard. Some have been closed forever. Careers have been diverted and in some cases devastated. There's amazingly talented professionals out of work or underemployed. And this entire industry has suffered through what has effectively been the year that travel stopped. But as leaders of this industry, an industry that's so critically important to our communities and our world, we have an opportunity to not only lead the recovery in our communities, but what a shame it would be if we come out of this and we've missed the opportunity to come through this stronger, wiser, and better prepared for the future. And one of the lessons learned for me in recovery efforts, both in Myrtle Beach, but especially here in Puerto Rico is, and this, we've all heard about it, and you've talked about it in some of your past podcasts, every crisis presents an opportunity. There are winners and losers out of every one of these. So now is the time that we position ourselves to come out of this on the winning side. And it's a big crisis, which means it's going to be an even bigger opportunity as we emerge from this.
So at the end of that article, you do end it on the idea of lead, follow, or get out of the way, which I love. And I know you have an appreciation that leadership doesn't have to come from some hierarchy or pedagogy. You're seeing new leadership, you're seeing young leadership, you're seeing opportunity. Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was a lesson learned really my first job, General Electric. It was an aggressive, proactive environment, and you learn very quickly, from almost day one, that you're either going to be a leader, you're going to be a follower. But if you can't fit in one of those two categories, get out of the way and let somebody else do it. And what's been encouraging and really, I have to say, David, inspiring to me is watching what's happening in our industry where young leaders are stepping up. I'm watching destinations that we never heard from or never thought of who are giving us great examples of how to adapt and respond. I know some of your listeners may disagree with me on this, but honestly, I think all of those DMOs out there for years that have complained about, well, I don't have the budget to do this, I'm a small DMO, they were better prepared than some of those of us who've been in major markets because they were used to being a jack of all trades. They were used to doing everything on a shoestring budget. So I'm just encouraged that I'm seeing young leaders emerge. I'm seeing new leaders emerge. And of course, there's still a few that are fighting and resisting this. But I think out of this crisis, one of the many accomplishments we're going to see for our industry is a new level of leadership. And it's important, it's necessary. And I think that will usher in another golden age of travel and tourism that we all are yearning for.
Well, thanks for that. And you ripped the Band-Aid off the GE question, so now I get to go there. So most of us have read Jack Welch's books, Straight from the Gut and Winning. And you were there, in the time when Crotonville campus was really emerging, becoming. For those who don't know what it is, tell us what Crotonville was like. And I got to ask, because it's a personal thing. What was it like?
Yeah, it was an extraordinary experience that I don't think I've never seen it duplicated. Certainly not the experience. And I've been fortunate to attend a lot of great educational, professional development in my career, but Crotonville was extraordinary. The reason I went to GE, honestly, was it was like it was an MBA on the job every day. And you got to learn from what not only Jack Welch, but his mentees and his devotees, if you will. And they created this extraordinary environment in upstate New York. I mean, there was no connection with the outside world. They wanted you totally focused and immersed in culture and learning. And what was really cool about Crotonville is no titles, no levels, no prima donnas allowed. Egos checked at the door. When you went there, you were there as part of the GE team, and the learning was immense. And when you came out of there, you were on fire. And I just loved it because it taught me a very important lesson that we can lead through culture. And that's one of the tactics that we employed here in Puerto Rico is we hired for culture. We didn't start with skills and talents. We started with, here's the culture we're building, and we're going to hire for this because we can teach and train the right people how to do this, but we can't necessarily teach culture. And of course, one of the many things I learned with General Electric is the entrepreneurial spirit of never really ever being satisfied, of always looking for the next opportunity, the next step. And I think as destination leaders, that's what our communities need right now. So while that was in the manufacturing world, it's every bit as relevant today for me in this role in travel and tourism.
I really like what you bring to this from the GE world, and I if I had to sum up Welch's philosophy, he would often say, in terms of strategy, set a direction and implement like hell. And I think you've added back in the points that he doesn't. I mean, he always talked about culture, but set a strategy, implement like hell. But make sure the corporate culture and the right people are there to execute and implement, recognize talent.
Yeah, Jack was an extraordinary visionary. Now, I will say, and may he rest in peace, a remarkable man. The books and the speeches that I read and saw after he left gave me a different impression of the guy. He was hard-nosed. I mean, he could have been a nose tackle in football, right? I mean, he just wanted to get down and get into it. But you know what? And you just touched on something that I think of all the things that have been said and written about Jack Welch. The one thing that is most overlooked is, yes, he was a visionary. Yes, he was a strategic mind, but execution was it. And that's where he drove some phenomenal results with GE. And if you look at the latter years of General Electric, they made some bad decisions. They made some questionable choices, but where they lost a lot of their footing was in the execution area. And Welch made sure he didn't care whether you were in a low-line business, whether you were in a progressive high-tech business. You could be running GE, you could be working on the line at the lighting factory in Cleveland, Ohio. Wherever you were, whatever you were doing, we need to be the best at execution. I think that's one of the reasons why he and the company were so successful.
Well, and I think that I want to go back to the article for a second. I think that comes out in the article. We need to be the best we can be. We need to, come up with smart, realistic ways to gain competitive advantage. That's a very GE saying. We need to put the right people in the right jobs, and then we actively have to seek out the best practices. And I just for those of you who want to read the article, it's up on Brad Dean's LinkedIn page, and maybe we'll repost it here as well, just so you can get a look at it. But I really appreciate that thoughtful, methodical, this is how you get out of the woods kind of approach. So thanks for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Listen, let's face it, we are approaching or perhaps in the midst of an era of reset. I mean, this is going to be one massive Control-Alt-Delete for the entire travel and tourism industry. And what comes out of this has to be better. We've got to build back better and smarter. And we can do it. I think we're well poised as an industry to do that. And people are counting on us to do exactly that for our stakeholders and our communities.
So, Brad, you have a history and an unquestionable skill in moving and inspiring people to create things that help destinations grow. And you've got an inclusive model. You've always used it. You bring lots of people into the tent. You empower people. I'm going to ask you a question that gets asked of me all the time. And it's really this. What is stakeholder engagement, and why does it matter?
This is so critically important to all of us, not just leaders and top tier managers, but I think at every level in our industry, whether you're private sector, public sector, whether you're in destination marketing, destination leadership, or somewhere in serving those needs. To me, stakeholder engagement is ultimately where we make our mark. And I think oftentimes, David, this may very well be the dividing line between, if not the winners and the losers, those who do well and those who do remarkably well. And for me, stakeholder engagement is really pretty simple. If you look at what we all do collectively, we are there to promote, protect, and improve our partners and our communities. So to engage your stakeholders in an effort to do that, it's important to keep them informed, to keep them inspired, and to keep them involved. And so what I've always looked at in organizations that I've led is, are we informing? Do people know what we're doing and how we're measuring success and why? But it's not just me talking. You've got to keep them involved. And I think that's where the listening skills become so critically important. But I also think that a part of our role is to inspire. I mean, let's face it, we're in an industry that connects people. We change lives. We shape communities and we help enhance the future of so many people, many of whom we'll never meet. There's an element of inspiration. And so I always try to weave into our stakeholder conversations that, I don't want to be Pollyannish, certainly not about what we're facing today, but I think they're looking to you and to me for some inspiration. And it's okay to be vulnerable and say, we don't have all the answers, especially in the midst of what we're dealing with now. But I think engagement comes down to making sure your stakeholders know not only what you're doing and why you're doing it, how you're measuring success, but informing them and involving them so they feel like they've got a hand in your success. And as you and I both know, our success is directly tied to the success of those we're serving. So I think that's ultimately where this leads to.
Well, I think that engagement piece is absolutely critically important. I also think what it helps do in really successful organizations is define their role and function. Is your role and function a marketer? And there's many destinations we have around the world where that will be their primary role and function. But in a lot of different destinations, maybe because they're a second-tier destination that has to work with civic governments, or they're a brand new organization that gets built from the ground up in order to be as effective as possible, what you're looking to do is unlock the alignment of the resources with all those partners. They've got products, you've got marketing channels, you've got development money, they've got the need for plans and planning, those kind of things. So I see us unlocking all sorts of new partnerships in tourism that we didn't do before. Tourism organizations that get involved in doing asset planning for civic projects, not necessarily building it, but looking at where it overlaps with the visitor and the citizen. You're working on models like that in Puerto Rico now, aren't you?
Absolutely. And I think you've touched on, to me, what is one of the, call it a trend, call it a new reality, call it maybe just some of us finally got the wake up call and figured this out. But that stakeholder engagement, I think, marries directly with what you're talking about in terms of not letting ourselves be constrained by the title or the formalities of our roles and functions. Bill Geist has been saying this for years. I think he's been prodding and nudging all of us to don't think of ourselves as just destination marketers, your destination leaders, whatever you call yourself. Even if it's not your designated responsibility, you need a seat at the table. And as we've learned all too well in the bad times in our industry, if you're not at the table, oftentimes you're on the menu. And so sometimes we have to kind of nudge our way in, be in that room where the decision is made. But here's the thing. We have what nobody else can duplicate. And so here in Puerto Rico, there's certain things that the government still controls, but we provide, whether it's research or insights or information, we're encouraged to see we've got a sister organization that's an economic development entity. And, no egos involved here. It's sharing information. And we, as has often been said in our industry, we are the first date for economic development. So we try to insert ourselves, but I always try to approach this in a way of, how can we add value to what you're doing? If you and I are so worried about titles and roles and responsibilities, and that just naturally, seeds to a turf war. But if we can approach it from the standpoint of, I've got a way to help you, I've got something you need, and we can share this and not do it in a threatening way, then I think that opens the doors. And we're seeing a lot of organizations doing this. And of course, Jack Johnson and the team at the DI have been telling us for the last couple of years, we've got to strive to be a shared community value. We're seeing great examples of that in our industry, and then we're seeing others that maybe haven't evolved it yet. I think that's critically important to the future of our industry and for us to be able to drive the kind of results that we're going to need going forward.
Well, that does really pop something into my head that we should talk about. So prior to the pandemic, the whole concept of stakeholder engagement, community shared values, they were present. You and I sat together at DI, 6 years ago when we began talking about this. But I would typify it as those were ideas that leaders were looking at and integrating. Along comes the crisis, and in your case, a crisis that happens in 2017 is when you look at Puerto Rico, and that's what galvanizes everybody. I don't think, come January 2021, there's many leaders out there who are arguing against engaged stakeholder base that, that underpins their relevance and their credibility. And I think, Jack's point about community shared values, we used to use the comparison that, look at the European model of over-tourism and understand that when things reach a breaking point, it's the citizen who has to be served at a destination. I think we were still debating that over here. Our crisis isn't over tourism. Now our crisis is a fear of tourism. And we're going to have to deal with the fact, as Jack so well says, that if a citizen and destination doesn't think of you as an essential service, then they probably don't think of you at all.
I absolutely. And let's face it, we didn't need to study this and analyze it. It was there. Some of us recognized it, most of us won't. And I got to admit, we took it from a perspective in Myrtle Beach when I was there as community engagement, because we were driving so many projects that extended out beyond tourism that I did it out of necessity, to be honest. But it's so important. And whether you were doing it before or not, there's, the landscape is changing so much that this is, I think this is our new reality going forward. We have to approach it that way. And what's interesting to me is when you think about where we're headed as an industry, we're going to have to find new ways to grow and expand. So those old, yesterday's solutions will not solve today's problems, but we also know that this is critically important. I've mentioned this in the past. I think posted something on LinkedIn once about, for me, 2020 was our George Bailey moment. If you think about it, It's a Wonderful Life, and George Bailey, when he's going to take his own life because he thinks he just had a terrible life, he's been a failure, and then the angel in training, Clarence, shows him what the world would have been like without George. Right. And he realizes he's lived a wonderful life. I think we're in our George Bailey moment. I think there's a lot of elected officials out there who didn't connect the dots on how much travel and tourism means to their economy. There are so many people who now really appreciate the benefits of travel beyond just posting on their Instagram account, the health and wellness that it brings. We need to seize that as an opportunity. We are coming to the table with what people need and want, but we've got to be able to engage at a level that perhaps many of us weren't. So partnerships are key, local relationships obviously important, and being able to engage in issues that aren't directly ours to own, but they're certainly ours to influence. And for us in Puerto Rico, one of the ways that we approached that early on is we made a decision not to be a membership organization. Not everybody that's listening, has that choice, but we were a new organization. And it was a tough one. On the one hand, we wanted those membership dues and the revenues. On the other hand, I love the freedom and liberty it gives me that I represent everybody. I don't have to worry about which restaurant is or isn't a member, which hotel I need to promote over others because they pay dues. If you're in the visitor economy, you're part of the team. And so it was a very liberating approach. It doesn't work for everybody, but it allowed us to reach a level of engagement that I hadn't even been able to reach before, simply because oftentimes we were bound by those traditional organizational barriers that are often created by membership.
So when you look at that, you can certainly see how we evolved models where we don't have great stakeholder engagement, or we have limited stakeholder engagement. That is all changing, and for some organizations it will change gradually. From others, there'll be a reset for sure on that front. I want to change gears here. I want to ask you this: wildly successful in Myrtle Beach, people look to what happened there, and it's an example of great tourism management. I was surprised that you picked such a new challenge in Puerto Rico. And what I want to ask you is actually this: when you've been 19 years running an aircraft carrier and making it all work and the partnerships that are all there, and then you completely change your MO and go back to the beginning of starting an organization, I'm not even so much what did you do, but what did it feel like? That's such a seismic shift, and I can totally dig it. I envy it in some sense, but I bet there were some real moments when you went back to feelings that you haven't had since you were 32 years old.
Yeah, it was on one level it was the easiest decision to make. On the other level, it was maybe the most difficult decision I'd ever made in my life. Myrtle Beach was home, and it is in many ways. My wife and I spent 20 years there. We raised our children there. We still have so many friends and family, and we had a great run. But a couple of things happened. Number one, my wife is from Puerto Rico. We actually met here, and her family had just had a terrible, terrible ordeal dealing with Hurricane Maria and Irma. So on a personal level, this was a chance for my wife to come back and once again be a daughter and a sister, and for my daughter to actually get to know her grandparents other than just vacationing in their backyard once a year. And for me, the trade-off was this. I was part of an extraordinary team in Myrtle Beach. The community had accomplished these great things. We could continue on that cycle. But, you reach a point, occasionally, leader, where you realize that, what, it's time to pull back and let the reins. And when I started to realize it is when I started to realize so many people were playing off of what I was doing that maybe I'd become a little too integral in the community, that this is an opportunity now for someone to come in and take the organization to the next level. At the same time, I was so excited about the opportunity to lead a startup. And what really led me here was this. It was the talk and the chatter about Puerto Rico will never come back. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the funding, they're bankrupt. And I love the opportunity that we could take the transformative power of travel and put it at work in a place that was devastated. And my hope was always that someday someone would be able to look at what we did and say, if they can do it, we can do it. And so that challenge of doing something that nobody thought was possible, and by the way, trying to do it in a couple of years, was just too appealing for me to turn down. So it was an extraordinary opportunity. But listen, I got to tell you, I really labored over the decision, and I got to give credit. People like Bill Geist, Mike Gamble, Roger Dow, Don Welch, who were there, Chris Thompson, who all said, if you do this, we got your back. And I tell you, if they had not, I don't know that I would have made the jump. But knowing I had some of the best and brightest in the industry behind me, knowing that it was both a personal and a professional mission, it made it a lot easier to say goodbye to some great friends and a wonderful community in South Carolina and call this home.
Well, no question. The times that Puerto Rico fell on after the hurricanes were tough, and it was difficult to watch how out of favor they fell and how little response they got from so many other sectors and organizations and governments. But I'm so proud to hear you say that this industry respects and reveres the position. I got to come down to Puerto Rico for the DI convention one year. Amazing place, amazing people. I've seen it in its built form. I've only seen it in pictures in its deconstructed form, but I'm so looking forward to coming back, and I'm so grateful from an industry sense that you're there and you're working on it and building a new organization with a new future. I'm excited when you say that you became maybe too integral to relationships in Myrtle Beach, and here you're building an organization that that one day will be run by 20 or 30 of the other brightest people in town, and that's exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And there's so many lessons we learn when we mature, and in that case, I spent my most formative years of my career in there. But you carry those with you, and you can share those and lighten those. So for me, this industry has been good to me. I mean, it has given me far more than I can ever give back to it. So to take the lessons learned and be able to hire and develop fresh new talent here in Puerto Rico is extraordinarily important. And that's, one of the things that I think is so great about our industry. And this is something I think we take for granted. This is not common in other industries, the sharing that goes on. I don't have, you don't have time for me to name all of the DMOs that invited us to say, hey, listen, send your staff here and we'll teach them how we do what we do. So, between DI, US Travel, Brand USA, and about 20 other DMOs, we were able to give people who didn't come from within our industry a crash course from the best and the brightest. So it was sort of my version of Crotonville. And now what I'm seeing is that leadership that we've planted in our island is now beginning to take root. And as we think about the opportunities that are emerging for all of us in this industry, not just in Puerto Rico, but throughout the world, I think it's that approach and that kind of leadership that's going to be so critically important because, as much as we've been through a terrible, terrible tragedy, uh, this is going to be an opportunity for all of us, and we're emerging through that now. So I'm optimistic about what lies ahead, not just for our island, but for our entire industry.
That's encouraging. And coming out of a different industry before this, and Bill Geist will tell you the same thing. Bill was a broadcaster as well. We both worked in an industry where not telling people what you were up to, never sharing your strategies, and even considering whether or not you told them whose meeting you just came from was the norm. So when we arrive on the scene in tourism and you realize the amount of sharing going on across the industry, the fact that, as you said, that you can talk to Chris at Brand USA, you can talk to Don, you can ask a question to John, I can pick up the phone and phone Lauren Gold in Raleigh. The amount of sharing in this industry is remarkable. And I think you underline that and remind us as we come out of this, don't be afraid to share. Don't be afraid to reach out, but don't be afraid to share what you've got as well, because that's always served this industry really well.
It always has. And David, as well as I do, it's going to be more important now than ever before, because while there are going to be tremendous opportunities, it's forcing all of us to adapt and respond, as you opened up with in this podcast. And for those that embrace this approach, I think the sky's the limits. And for those that can't, it could be a rough ride.
So we'll wrap it up now, and I'll leave you with just one question. 2021 tourism, what's the opportunity?
Yeah, first and foremost, obviously, we've all embraced this new reality that we have to manage this intersection between travel and health and safety. But I think the next evolution of that is a truly seamless, safe, contactless travel process all throughout the travel continuum. And we're just beginning to address this, but I think the technology is there or emerging. So I think that's going to be part of our new reality, and we just have to embrace this. We've got to keep in mind, as much as we talk about consumer confidence, it's really about earning and maintaining trust. If we earn and maintain their trust, we'll have their confidence. So I think that's one. Second, I'm actually excited about what I think is an emergence of travel with a purpose and conscience. Call it regenerative travel. Call it just simply, I think of it as where our values meet our vacations. But I think this has been there. This is not new, but it's growing, it's expanding, and it's not limited to just one or two generations. And the more we think of that in our planning and our strategies, I think the better off we are. And I'm hopeful that over the next year or so that we'll evolve our definition of sustainability, which always seems to be almost exclusively applied to the environment, and that's important. But sustainability is so much more than that. It's balancing, the economic realities, the historical and cultural realities that are so important. So I'm excited about that. And if you think back to post 9/11, where it made all of us kind of do a values check, and I remember Myrtle Beach, we saw the biggest increase of multi-generational travel. It was when, we said, you know what, we can't take tomorrow for granted. We're going to get the whole family together and do that vacation to Myrtle Beach or go to Disney or take that cruise. I think we're going to see that kind of a movement on steroids. And I think this crisis is teaching us that right now. And then last but certainly not least, and you as Simple View are helping lead this, if we thought the technology and the pace of change was fast and significant before, it was nothing like we're going to see. I think it's a dynamic, digitalized marketplace that we are now competing in. And the cool thing about it is, as I think it was Thomas Friedman recently, convening leaders, said the world is more flat than it's ever been. This is great news for all of us who want to emerge and compete at a whole new level. And I had to laugh when I saw Sheriff Karamut from PCMA hologram version at the convening leaders. And I thought, here's a great example. Technology has been out there, but I think this is going to become a lot more commonplace. So bottom line for me is I see 2021 as really the beginning of this massive recovery. And I'm a sports fan, so I always put it in sports analogies, David. I think of if I look at 2020 and 2021, it's like the first and second half of the football game. We had a rough first half. It did not go the way we thought. We went into the locker room and it was, COVID 14, the rest of us 3. But the second half is when great teams adjust their plans. They take a player out, they put a new player in. They come back with some new plays and a whole new approach. And I think 2021 is the second half of this game, and travel and tourism is going to score big.
Well, I totally concur with that analogy, and I'd say it's the game before the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl will be when we turn the switches back on and the tourists start coming. We have a whole new challenge, which is really understand what's changed in their consumption process, because they will consume tourism differently. And I love what you just said about seeing a blip towards family-oriented tourism after 9/11. Those kind of things we're going to have to be highly aware of. How people travel. I like you, hope people travel with intent and purpose. I'm sure that'll come. But when we win this game in the second half, off we go to the Super Bowl, and that's where it gets exciting, which is experimenting with the consumer, the traveler, when they come back to the market too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now is the opportunity for all of us as leaders in this industry to seize the moment, to be better, to do better, and to accomplish more. The opportunity's there. It's ours for the taking.
Brad, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. I hope to check in with you again, and maybe we can talk about what the consumer is thinking next time, because we'll have a better window on that, because we'll have some consumers.
Look forward to discussing that for sure.
All right. It's great to see you. Thanks again.
It's always a pleasure. Saludos from Puerto Rico.